They saw only rust and wrinkles, dust and defeat. When smiling Jack Stone's men laughed at old Silas and his battered rifle, they thought they were kicking sand at a ghost already halfway in the grave. Their laughter echoed, sharp and cruel, in the thin air of Redemption Gulch, a sound that would soon curdle into choked silence, because beneath the stooped shoulders and the faded canvas coat beat the heart of a past this frontier had tried, and failed, to forget. That rusty rifle wasn't a relic, it was a carefully disguised instrument of judgment. And the old man wasn't just an old man. He was a reckoning waiting to happen. The outlaw's fatal mistake wasn't just mocking him, it was waking him up. How long could a legend stay buried before the gunfire started again? 4 or 5 years, Silas had been a fixture on the edge of Redemption Gulch, quiet as the dust settling after a windstorm. He drifted in with the tumbleweeds, claimed a patch of hard ground by Bitter Creek, a stream mostly picked clean by earlier, luckier prospectors, and built a life as small and unassuming as the flecks of gold he occasionally found. To the townsfolk, he was simply Silas, the old prospector. His shoulders seemed permanently bowed, not just by age, but by the weight of unseen burdens. His hands, calloused and worn, often trembled slightly as he worked his pan, swirling gravel and water under the unforgiving sun. His cabin was stark, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but built with a peculiar, hidden solidity, as if braced for more than just the weather. His days bled into one another with quiet repetition. Rise with the faint pre-dawn light, walk the familiar path to the creek, spend hours hunched over, sifting, searching, hoping for enough color to trade at Hemlock's general store for the bare necessities: beans, salt pork, coffee, lamp oil. He rarely spoke more than a few words at a time, preferring a slow nod or a simple grunt. He moved through town like a shadow, his pale blue eyes often downcast, seemingly lost in thoughts of leaner times. Sheriff Brody, a man wrestling with the thankless task of keeping order in a town perpetually teetering on the brink, saw Silas as a symbol of the gulch itself, worn down, isolated, clinging to survival. Brody felt a weary kinship, perhaps even a touch of pity, for the old man's solitary grind. He'd share a silent nod with Silas on the boardwalk sometimes, 2 men carrying different kinds of weight under the same vast, indifferent sky. The town itself felt vulnerable. A brutal winter had left supplies dangerously low, and whispers of Apache troubles further south kept nerves frayed. Redemption Gulch was a place holding its breath, hoping for the best, but expecting the worst. It felt exposed, a lonely outpost ripe for trouble. But Silas wasn't just enduring, he was observing, always observing. Though his gaze often seemed unfocused, it missed nothing. He registered the loose board on the saloon steps that tripped a drunken cowboy, the way the wind shifted dust devils across the plain, the nervous flick of a horse's ear sensing an approaching rider long before anyone else heard hoofbeats. This constant, quiet assessment was ingrained, a habit from another life he couldn't shake. When he thought no one watched, mending a tool or chopping firewood, his movements held a surprising, economical grace, no wasted motion, a controlled efficiency that belied his apparent frailty. Young Timmy, the stable boy who sometimes shared Silas's sparse midday meal down by the creek, saw glimpses of it. He'd seen the faint, silvery scars that laced the old man's knuckles, scars that didn't come from panning gold. And he'd seen the rifle. Everyone saw the rust, the battered stock, the general air of neglect. But Timmy, peering closer one afternoon, while Silas meticulously wiped down the barrel, saw the hidden truth. The breech, the firing pin, the carefully oiled inner workings gleamed with a level of care bordering on reverence. It was a stark contrast Silas seemed keen to maintain. When Silas noticed the boy's curious gaze, his own eyes had sharpened for a fleeting second, a flicker of something cold and hard, before softening again into his usual weary kindness. "Every tool needs its due, son," Silas had murmured, turning the rifle away. "Keeps it true." Even in the quiet solitude of his cabin, the peace Silas craved felt thin. He'd sit by the small window, watching the heat shimmer off the distant mesas, and sometimes his hand would unconsciously clench, the knuckles white, as if gripping something long gone, or something waiting to return. The instincts he'd tried to bury beneath years of panning and silence were still there, dormant but not dead. A low hum of vigilance ran beneath his quiet exterior, a constant readiness masked by stillness. He wanted peace, desperately, but the frontier rarely let a man choose his own ending. The disruption arrived like a thunderclap on a clear day. 5 riders, emerging from the shimmering heat haze like apparitions, conjured from the dust itself. They didn't ride like cowhands searching for work or settlers seeking land. They rode with the coiled energy of predators, their horses lean and wiry, their own bodies honed by hard living and harder choices. Their eyes swept over the small town, cold and calculating. Leading them was smiling Jack Stone. He possessed a dangerous charm, amplified by his relatively fine clothes, a dark vest, clean shirt, boots polished to a high shine despite the dust. His smile flashed easily, showing perfect white teeth, but it never reached his eyes. Those remained sharp, assessing, missing nothing. Riding low on his hip, catching the sun, was a silver-plated Colt Peacemaker, worn smooth from handling. It wasn't just a tool, it was a statement. His men were reflections of his ruthlessness, etched in harsher lines. Cutter, named for the jagged white scar that split his left eyebrow and the Bowie knife always within reach. Rhodes, a hulking brute whose silence was more menacing than any threat, his gaze flat and empty. And 2 younger ones, Finn and Pete, their eyes darting with a nervous energy, eager to emulate the casual brutality of their leader. As they rode slowly down the main street, a palpable chill descended upon Redemption Gulch. Doors quietly closed. Faces vanished from windows. The lazy afternoon buzz of the town evaporated, replaced by a tense, waiting silence. It was the silence of prey sensing the wolf. Silas had just stepped out of Hemlock's general store, clutching a small sack containing a few precious pounds of flour and coffee. His old rifle, his constant companion, leaned against the weathered clapboard wall beside the door. He saw the riders approaching, noted their gear, their posture, the way they surveyed the town. Instinctively, he tried to melt back against the wall, to become invisible. It was a futile effort. Cutter, perhaps sensing the old man's attempt to fade away, deliberately guided his horse too close. The animal's shoulder checked Silas, knocking him off balance. The small sack slipped from his grasp, bursting open in the thick dust, scattering flour and precious coffee beans. "Clumsy old fool," Cutter sneered, reining his horse back slightly, enjoying the spectacle. "Watch yourself." Smiling Jack halted his mount, looking down with amusement as Silas knelt stiffly, trying to salvage what little he could from the dirt. Jack's gaze flicked from the spilled supplies to the rifle leaning against the wall. The infamous smile spread across his face, slow and condescending. "Well, ain't this a sorry sight?" Jack drawled, his voice carrying in the unnerving quiet. "Looky here, boys. Gramps was going to hold off the Apaches with that museum piece." Rhodes spat a stream of tobacco juice that landed inches from Silas's worn boot. The younger outlaws snickered, taking their cue from Jack. "Times look hard, old-timer," Jack continued, his eyes sweeping over Silas's patched coat and faded trousers. "Don't seem like these hills been too generous." Silas didn't respond verbally. He finished gathering the pitiful remains of his supplies, the dirt mingling freely with the flour. He rose slowly, his joints seeming to creak. His face remained impassive, a mask carved by time and hardship. He reached for his rifle. As his hand closed around the worn stock, his eyes lifted and met Jack's. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. There was no fear in Silas's pale blue gaze, only a profound stillness, an unnerving depth. His eyes flickered briefly to the silver-plated Colt on Jack's hip, registering its make, its position, the way Jack's fingers rested near it. It was an assessment, swift and total, before the veil dropped back into place. Jack, perhaps caught off guard by the lack of expected fear, held the gaze a second longer than intended. Did he see something there? A flicker of something other than weary resignation? He couldn't be sure. He dismissed it with a chuckle, breaking the tension. Ah, hell, leave the poor devil be. He ain't worth powder and shot. Jack gestured towards the saloon. Come on, boys. My throat's drier than this town looks. Let's see if they got any whiskey that don't taste like paint thinner. The gang moved on, spurs clinking, swaggering through the swinging doors of the saloon. Silas remained standing in the street, alone amid the settling dust and his spilled supplies. He watched the saloon doors sway shut. The coldness in his gut, the unwelcome visitor from his past, wasn't just visiting anymore. It felt like it was settling in, unpacking its bags. The fragile peace he'd cultivated for 5 years felt like a sandcastle facing an incoming tide. This storm wouldn't just pass through. It aimed to drown everything. Smiling Jack Stone and his men settled into Redemption Gulch like a blight. The initial unease curdled quickly into outright fear. The saloon became their personal domain. Nights were filled with raucous laughter, drunken shouts, and the occasional splintering crash of furniture. Henderson, the saloon owner, wrung his hands but dared not present a bill. His fear was a tangible thing, sweating on his brow each time the gang swaggered in. Cutter discovered a cruel talent for poker, or perhaps just for intimidation. He played cards constantly, his pile of winnings growing suspiciously large. Old Man Hemlock, trying to win back his meager savings, was ruthlessly cleaned out, leaving the saloon white-faced and trembling, muttering about marked cards under his breath, but only when Cutter was out of earshot. Rhodes, the silent giant, developed an unnerving habit of loitering near Gunnar the blacksmith shop. He wouldn't say much, just watch Gunnar work, watch Gunnar's daughter, Elsbeth, as she brought her father his lunch. Gunnar, usually a man of booming laughter and ready smiles, became tight-lipped and grim. His hammer blows lost their cheerful rhythm. He shod the gang's horses with quick, jerky movements, refusing payment, his eyes fixed on the ground, avoiding Rhodes's unnerving stare. Sheriff Brody felt the town's fear like a physical weight on his shoulders. He was a good man, fundamentally decent, but hopelessly outgunned and lacking the hard edge needed to confront men like Stone. He made one attempt, cornering Jack outside the saloon one evening. "Stone," Brody began, his voice lacking conviction. "Your men, they're pushing folks too hard. You gotta rein 'em in." Smiling Jack turned, his easy grin firmly in place, but his eyes were cold steel. He stepped close, invading Brody's space. "Reckon I don't gotta do anything, Sheriff," Jack said softly, conversationally. He tapped the tin star on Brody's vest. "This piece of metal, it gonna stop a bullet? Gonna protect that wife of yours? Little Sarah, isn't it? Pretty girl." Jack leaned in, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I passed your house today. Nice little place. Awful flammable, though. You understand me, Sheriff?" The blood drained from Brody's face. His hand twitched near his holster, a useless reflex. He swallowed hard, the words catching in his throat. He could only nod, defeated. Jack laughed, a short, ugly bark, clapped Brody condescendingly on the shoulder, and strolled away, leaving the sheriff standing alone in the street, utterly broken. The town saw it. The last flicker of hope dimmed considerably. Through it all, Silas maintained his routine, a seeming island of indifference in a sea of rising panic. He went to the creek, worked his claim, returned to his cabin. He saw the bruises on Hemlock's pride, the terror in Gunnar's eyes when Rhodes walked past, the slump of despair in Sheriff Brody's shoulders. He heard the hushed whispers, felt the suffocating tension. On the surface, he remained the quiet prospector. But beneath the surface, the old machinery was grinding back into motion. His trips to the creek became longer, his panning sometimes secondary to watching the distant figures of the gang members as they moved around town, noting their habits, their routines, who went where, when. He wasn't just looking for gold anymore. He was gathering intelligence. He found himself unconsciously mapping sight lines from his cabin, from the creek bed, from the edge of town. One evening, mending his worn coat by the light of a low fire, he paused, needle held midair. He listened, head cocked, to the distant sounds from the saloon. Not just the noise, but the pattern of it. Whose laugh was loudest? Who sounded drunkest? He was analyzing, assessing threats, old habits dying harder than hope. He saw Timmy the stable boy being roughly pushed aside by Pete one afternoon. Silas didn't intervene directly, but later, when he saw Timmy near the creek, Silas asked, his voice casual, "That black gelding, Stone's horse, does he favor a leg?" Timmy, rubbing his bruised shoulder, shook his head. "Nah, Silas. He's fast. Real fast." Silas nodded slowly, filing the information away. Then came the trip to Hemlock's store. He needed lamp oil, yes, but his eyes lingered on the shelf behind the counter, where Hemlock kept the ammunition. He picked up a small, heavy box of .44-40 rifle cartridges, the caliber for his old Winchester. Hemlock, wrapping the oil, noticed the box. "Figuring on doing some hunting, Silas?" he asked, trying for normalcy. Silas just grunted, pushed the coins across the counter. The weight of the cartridges in his pocket felt immense, a tangible commitment. Walking back towards his cabin, he passed Martha Henderson, the saloon owner's wife, hurrying along the boardwalk, her face tight with worry. He saw the fear in her eyes, the same fear reflected in nearly every face in Redemption Gulch. The carefully constructed wall between Silas the prospector and Silas Kane, the man he used to be, felt dangerously thin. The quiet life was proving to be a fragile thing, easily shattered by predatory men. He gripped the cartridges in his pocket, the cold metal a stark reminder of skills he wished he could forget, but knew he might soon need. The stagecoach arrived like a wounded animal crawling home to die. It was 2 days overdue, pulled by only 2 exhausted horses, the coach itself scarred by bullet holes. Inside, the driver lay slumped, barely conscious, his shirt soaked crimson from a shoulder wound. A passenger, a drummer selling patent medicines, was dead, his vacant eyes staring up at the cracked ceiling. The young male guard, barely old enough to shave, lay dead back at Muddy Gap Pass, left where he fell. The driver, gasping through the pain as Doc Hodges tried to stem the bleeding, told the horrifying story. Ambushed by Smiling Jack and his men, they hadn't just taken the strongbox, they'd reveled in cruelty, stealing personal belongings, mocking the terrified passengers. The male guard, loyal to his post, had tried to defend the mail pouch. Smiling Jack had laughed and shot him in the chest. Point blank. Raw panic, cold and sharp, ripped through Redemption Gulch. This wasn't just threats and theft anymore. This was cold-blooded murder. Families whispered urgently about packing up, abandoning everything, fleeing before Stone's gang decided the townsfolk themselves were fair game. The thin veneer of civilization felt utterly stripped away. Smiling Jack and his crew rode back into town later that day, oblivious or indifferent to the terror they'd sown. They were flush with stolen cash, loud with stolen whiskey. They heard the fearful whispers, saw the accusing glares from behind shuttered windows, and it only fueled Jack's arrogant rage. How dare these sheep judge him? He decided to make a statement. He kicked open the door to the general store. Hemlock wasn't there, only his wife, Martha, a sturdy woman known for her quiet resilience, stood behind the counter, her face pale but resolute. "Need provisions," Jack announced loudly, gesturing dismissively. "Boys, help yourselves." Cutter, Rhodes, and Finn began grabbing whatever they wanted: sacks of flour, tins of peaches, bottles of whiskey, ammunition. Martha stepped forward, her hands clenched at her sides. "You cannot just take." Her voice trembled slightly, but she stood her ground. Cutter moved with vicious speed. The back of his hand cracked across Martha's face, the sound sharp and ugly in the sudden silence. She cried out, stumbling backward, hitting the shelves hard. Jars rattled. Her hand flew to her mouth, coming away smeared with bright red blood from her split lip. Silas was across the street, ostensibly adjusting the worn harness on his mule. He saw the entire exchange through the store window. He saw Cutter's blow land. He saw the shock and pain bloom on Martha's face. He saw the blood. In that instant, something cold and hard, buried deep within him for years, shattered its dormancy. The careful control, the cultivated passivity, dissolved like mist in a harsh wind. This was a line crossed, a violation that triggered something primal, something dangerous. Sheriff Brody rushed towards the store, drawn by Martha's cry. He saw her bleeding lip, saw the outlaws brazenly looting the shelves. This time, the humiliation, the fear, was eclipsed by pure, unadulterated outrage. He drew his service revolver, his hand shaking but his eyes blazing. "Stone, damn you, that's enough. Drop it, all of you. You're under arrest for robbery and murder." Smiling Jack turned slowly, a predator's amusement in his eyes. His silver-plated Colt seemed to leap into his hand. He didn't even aim at Brody. He fired inches from the sheriff's head, the roar of the gun deafening in the confined space, the bullet splintering the wood of the counter. Brody flinched violently, involuntarily, dropping his own gun with a clatter. Jack laughed, a grating sound devoid of humor. He contemptuously kicked Brody's fallen pistol aside. Then, with theatrical disdain, he reached over, ripped the tin star from Brody's vest, and threw it onto the dusty floorboards. "Arrest!" Jack sneered, stepping over the badge. "This town has no law but me now, Sheriff. You're nothing. Less than nothing. Remember that, if you value breathing." Brody stood paralyzed, stripped of his authority. His dignity ground into the dust along with his badge. Silas watched from across the street, his face expressionless, but his eyes were burning with a cold fire. He saw the finality of it. The law was broken. Hope was extinguished. The choice was gone. Action was now the only path left. That evening, as the sky bled into shades of angry orange and deep violet, Silas didn't just clean his rifle. He communed with it. He disassembled it with the swift, sure movements of long practice, checking every tolerance, oiling every moving part until the action was whisper-smooth. The superficial rust seemed insignificant now, a meaningless disguise shed. This was Marshal Kane's rifle, an extension of his will, an arbiter of frontier justice. Later, cloaked in the deepening shadows, he made his way to the stables. Timmy was nervously tending to the horses, jumping at every creak of the old building. "Silas," the boy whispered, relieved to see a familiar face. "Timmy." Silas's voice was low, calm. "Tell me about the gang's horses again. Which ones tire easy? Which saddle does Jack use on that black gelding?" He listened intently as the boy, sensing the shift in the old man, the quiet intensity, provided the details. Silas placed a reassuring hand on Timmy's shoulder. "Stay inside tonight, son. Bolt your door. Don't come out, no matter what you hear." Silas Kane stepped out of the stables and looked towards the noise spilling from the saloon. The quiet prospector had served his purpose. Now, another man walked in his boots. The weight of the rifle felt familiar again, comfortable, like shaking hands with a dangerous old friend. The frontier had demanded his return, and he would answer. The humid twilight deepened, bringing no relief from the tension gripping Redemption Gulch. Inside the saloon, Pete and Cutter were growing restless. Terrorizing the townsfolk had lost its initial thrill. They needed amusement. "That old prospector." Pete slurred slightly, wiping whiskey from his chin. "Bet he's got that mule tied up down by the creek. Let's go take it. Teach the old fool a lesson for being old." Cutter grinned, the scar on his face tightening. He liked the casual cruelty of the idea. "Yeah, let's stretch our legs." They stumbled out into the near darkness, heading towards Bitter Creek. They found Silas, just as Pete predicted, near the water's edge, loading his few possessions onto the mule's back. He looked like he was finally giving up, ready to flee. Well, looky here," Cutter called out, his voice loud and mocking. Pete moved to flank Silas, blocking any retreat along the creek bank. "Packing up, Gramps? Going somewhere?" Silas didn't turn immediately. He meticulously adjusted a rope on the mule's pack saddle. The animal shifted nervously. "Forget the packing," Pete said, putting a hand threateningly on the butt of his holstered pistol. "We're taking the mule now. Make it easy on yourself." Silas straightened slowly and turned to face them. In the gloom, his face was shadowed, unreadable. He looked frail, tired. "Leave the animal," he said, his voice raspy, seeming to crack with age. "It's all I have." Cutter laughed heartily. "Should have thought of that before being a useless old relic." He started to draw his weapon, slow and deliberate, savoring the moment of intimidation. "Now step aside, old man, before you get hurt." The world seemed to stutter. Silas moved with a speed that defied logic, defied age. One moment he was a stooped old man. The next, the rusty rifle was snapping up to his shoulder, seemingly without effort. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion, just pure, economical deadliness honed over decades. Crack! The first shot wasn't deafening, but sharp, precise. Cutter cried out, not in pain, but in shocked surprise as his pistol was violently torn from his hand, spinning away into the darkness. His fingers felt numb, electric. Before Pete could even react, his brain struggling to comprehend the impossible speed, crack. The second shot echoed the first. Pete yelled as his metal canteen, full of water, exploded against his hip, drenching his leg. The bullet had punched clean through, missing flesh by a hair's breadth. Silence slammed down, absolute except for the gurgle of the creek and the ragged breathing of the two outlaws. They stood frozen, adrenaline turning their blood to ice water. The sheer impossibility of what had just happened held them captive. This wasn't luck. This was skill beyond imagining. Silas stepped forward out of the deeper shadows, the rifle held rock-steady, its muzzle unwavering. The frail prospector was gone, replaced by someone else entirely. His posture was erect, his eyes sharp and hard as flint in the dim light. "Gun belts," Silas commanded. His voice was different now, lower, clearer, colder, stripped of any hint of age or infirmity. On the ground, slow, Pete, trembling uncontrollably, fumbled with his buckle, letting the heavy belt thud into the dirt. Cutter, cradling his stinging hand, did the same, his earlier arrogance replaced by stark, primal fear. Who in God's name are you?" Cutter whispered, the words barely audible. Silas didn't answer directly. He kept the rifle leveled, but it was Pete, staring intently at Silas's stance, the way he held the rifle, the absolute calm authority radiating from him, who suddenly choked out the words. Fragments of old stories, fireside legends, warnings from his outlaw father coalesced into horrifying realization. That way you shoot the speed." Pete stammered, his eyes wide with terror and disbelief. "My pa, he told tales. Marshal out of Kansas, cleaned up Abilene, faced down the Reno boys. They said he vanished. Said no one was faster, steadier. Said they called him Silas the Steady." Pete's voice trailed off, then surged back, filled with dawning dread. "Marshal. Silas Kane." The name dropped into the heavy air like a stone into a deep well. Marshal Silas Kane. The legend. The ghost. Cutter's jaw went slack. He'd heard the name. Every outlaw worth his salt had heard whispers of Silas Kane, the lawman who was part relentless tracker, part unstoppable force, before he'd simply disappeared decades ago, presumed dead or retired to obscurity. Silas Kane offered no verbal confirmation. He didn't need to. The deadly competence, the icy calm in his eyes, was confirmation enough. He was the man from the legends, the man who had sought peace in the anonymity of gold panning, only to have violence drag him back. "Use their belts," Silas instructed Pete, nodding towards the discarded gun belts. "Tie their hands. Tight." Pete, numb with fear, scrambled to obey, his fumbling fingers barely managing the knots under Kane's unwavering gaze. Soon, Cutter and Pete were bound, gagged with strips of cloth torn from their own shirts, and left helpless by the whispering creek. Kane picked up their pistols, methodically emptied the cylinders, and tossed the useless firearms into the deepest part of the water. He turned, leaving the two terrified outlaws to contemplate their monumental error in judgment. The news hit Redemption Gulch like lightning striking the church steeple. Sheriff Brody, alerted by a frantic Timmy, found the two bound outlaws. Pete, gagged but desperate, managed to mumble the name. Kane. Silas Kane. Brody stared from the captured men towards the faint light of the prospector's cabin, his mind reeling. Disbelief warred with a sudden, burgeoning hope. Whispers turned to stunned murmurs, spreading from the stables to the saloon, through locked doors and shuttered windows. The old prospector, Silas Kane, Marshal Silas Kane. Smiling Jack Stone was dealing cards in the saloon, cheating with practiced ease. When the whispers reached him, he threw back his head and laughed, loud and long. Kane, that broken-down old fool? You people are spooked by shadows. Kane's long dead or rotting in some forgotten corner. But the laughter sounded forced, even to his own ears. The name, Kane, resonated unpleasantly. He remembered childhood stories, warnings from older outlaws about the marshal who couldn't be bought, couldn't be scared, and whose rifle never missed. He glanced at the empty spaces, where Cutter and Pete should have been drinking and boasting. A cold serpent of doubt coiled in his belly. What if? He slammed his cards onto the table, the jovial facade cracking. Rhodes. Finn, he barked, shoving his chair back. Get your guns. We're gonna pay Silas Kane, or whoever the hell he is, a final visit. Time to put this ghost story to bed, permanently. He needed to crush this rumor, crush the man, before fear gave way to defiance in this pathetic town. Smiling Jack Stone couldn't tolerate legends. Legends bred hope, and hope bred resistance. His control over Redemption Gulch rested on a foundation of fear, and the whispers of Silas Kane were eroding it like acid, fueled by whiskey, wounded pride, and that nagging, insistent sliver of doubt. He stormed out of the saloon, Rhodes and the nervous young gunman Finn at his heels. The swinging doors banged against the frame behind them. Kane, Jack bellowed, his voice raw with anger, rolling down the deserted main street. Get out here, you fraud. Let's see if the stories are true, or if you're just a lucky old fool. Face me. Behind bolted doors and grimy windows, the townsfolk watched, their fear now mingled with a desperate, almost painful hope. Could it be true? Could this quiet, unassuming old man really be their salvation? Every soul in Redemption Gulch held their breath. Then he appeared, emerging from the gloom near the creek path. Silas Kane walked into the center of the street. He moved with a slow, deliberate gait, the setting sun striking sparks off the pitted barrel of the rifle held loosely in his right hand. He looked ancient, weathered, the embodiment of the harmless prospector they all thought they knew. It was a masterful piece of misdirection, playing on their expectations one last time. Jack's confidence surged back at the sight. He let out a harsh laugh. Look at him. Ready for the Undertaker. I knew it was just stories. He felt Rhodes relax slightly beside him, Finn shifting his weight nervously. You got lucky with Cutter and Pete, old man. Jack sneered, gesturing expansively. But your luck just died. Get on your knees. Beg for your miserable life. Silas stopped perhaps 30 yards away, the long shadow stretching out before him like a pointing finger. He didn't look directly at Jack. His pale eyes swept the street, calmly taking in every detail. Finn's trigger-happy nervousness, Rhodes's brute strength positioning, the exact angle of the fading sunlight, the location of the blacksmith's water trough, the shadowed overhang of the saloon roof, providing potential cover. It was the calm, calculating assessment of a master strategist, sizing up the battlefield. You made 2 mistakes, Silas said. His voice, though quiet, cut through the tension like a honed blade. It held no tremor of age, only the flat certainty of impending violence. First was thinking rust meant weakness. He paused, letting the silence stretch, amplifying the weight of his next words. Second was waking me up. The air seemed to crackle. It wasn't Silas who broke the deadlock. It was Finn. Young, scared, and desperate to prove his worth. He drew and fired in a single jerky motion. The shot went wild, kicking up dust far to Silas's left. Silas didn't even flinch. As Finn fired, Silas executed a subtle, almost imperceptible sidestep, a movement that looked like an old man's stumble, but was perfectly timed evasion. In the same fluid motion, the rifle came up, seemingly without conscious thought. Crack! The report was distinct, sharp. Finn screamed. His pistol flying from a hand instantly transformed into a mangled mess of blood and shattered bone. He staggered backward, clutching his ruined hand, his face a mask of agony and shock. One down. Rhodes, seeing Finn fall, let out a bellow of pure rage. Foregoing his own firearm, he lowered his massive head and charged, intending to pulverize the old man with sheer brute force. The ground trembled slightly under his heavy boots. Silas stood his ground like an ancient oak facing a gale. The rifle swung smoothly, tracking the charging behemoth. He didn't rush the shot. He waited for the perfect moment. Crack! The bullet struck Rhodes low, in the kneecap. The big man's momentum carried him forward a few more steps before his leg buckled completely. He crashed to the ground in a heap, his roar of fury turning into a high-pitched scream of agony. Two down. The speed. The lethal precision. It was terrifyingly efficient. Smiling Jack Stone stared, his sneer evaporating, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. His hard men, his muscle, dispatched in mere seconds. The campfire stories, the whispered warnings, they were all true. This wasn't an old prospector. This was death incarnate, wearing wrinkles and dust. Raw panic clawed at Jack's throat. You can't be. He stammered, fumbling for his own silver-plated Colt, the symbol of his authority, his arrogance. He finally ripped it free, bringing it up, firing wildly, blindly, rage and terror warring within him. Bullets whined past Silas, kicking up dust, thudding into storefronts. Silas used the nearby water trough for a moment's cover, one of Jack's panicked shots sending a spray of water into the air. He rose, steady as the mountains beyond the town. He lined up his shot with chilling calmness, ignoring the bullets snapping around him. Jack was still firing, screaming curses, his fear making his aim erratic. Crack! Silas fired his last shot. It wasn't aimed at Jack's heart or head. It was aimed at his power, his pride. The heavy slug struck Jack's gun hand. There was a sickening crunch, a spray of blood, and the gleaming silver Colt Peacemaker was flung from Jack's grasp, spinning through the air before landing with a muted thud in the thick dust. Smiling Jack Stone stared stupidly at his mangled right hand, blood pouring between his fingers. He looked at his beautiful, useless gun lying in the dirt. Then his gaze lifted to Silas Kane. The old man stood unwavering, the rifle held loosely now, the setting sun creating a fiery halo around his gray hair. His face was impassive, his eyes holding the cold, hard light of judgment delivered. An absolute, profound silence descended upon the main street of Redemption Gulch. It was broken only by the ragged, pain-filled groans of Rhodes and Finn, and a low, whimpering sound of disbelief escaping the lips of the disarmed and defeated smiling Jack Stone. The reign of terror was over. Slowly, tentatively, like prairie dogs emerging after a hawk has passed, the townsfolk began to appear. Doors creaked open. Faces peered around corners, eyes wide with a mixture of lingering fear, dawning relief, and overwhelming awe. They stared at the wounded, groaning outlaws littering the street, then at the solitary figure standing over them, the quiet prospector revealed as a living legend. Sheriff Brody stepped forward, his face grim but resolute. He bent down, picked up his tarnished tin badge from the dust where Jack had thrown it, and pinned it firmly back onto his vest. His hand was steady as he drew his service revolver. He walked towards the whimpering Jack Stone. "All right, Stone." Brody's voice rang out, clear and strong, filled with reclaimed authority. Your time in Redemption Gulch is done. Other men from the town emerged, carrying shotguns, rifles, even axes, their fear replaced by a hardened resolve. They moved purposefully, surrounding the wounded outlaws, ready to secure them, ready to reclaim their town. Silas Kane watched them, his expression unreadable. He saw the shift, the fear replaced by courage, the helplessness replaced by action. His part was played. He didn't wait for thanks, didn't offer explanations. He calmly worked the lever action of his rifle, ejecting the spent shell casings. The metallic clink-clink sounded unnaturally loud in the charged silence. He caught Sheriff Brody's eye across the street. A brief nod passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of harsh necessities, of burdens shared in justice, however brutal, served. Respect, understanding. Then, Silas Kane turned his back on the aftermath. He turned away from the awestruck gazes, the captured outlaws, the town he had inadvertently saved. He walked slowly, his shoulders settling back into their familiar, weary slump, heading back towards the fading light and the quiet solitude of Bitter Creek. Redemption Gulch breathed again, free from the grip of smiling Jack Stone. The outlaws would face the hangman's noose or rot in Yuma Territorial Prison. The town, scarred but not broken, had rediscovered its backbone, thanks to the ghost who walked among them. Silas Kane resumed his life as the Prospector. He still worked his meager claim, still kept mostly to himself, but nothing was quite the same. The townsfolk looked at him differently now, with a mixture of reverence and quiet respect. They kept their distance, sensing his need for solitude, but their nods held a new depth. The rusty rifle still leaned by his cabin door, a silent testament to the truth. The peace Silas had sought so desperately remained fractured, perhaps forever tainted by the violence he'd unleashed. He had saved the town, but in doing so, he had resurrected the part of himself he most wanted to bury. Yet, as the quiet returned to Redemption Gulch, there was a sense of hard-won balance. The legend rested, for now, alongside the lonely Prospector, a permanent, silent guardian watching over the dusty trail.